to the Thoughtful Software Podcast with your hosts, Andrew Wolf and Fahad Shokat. Thoughtful Software is a set of values, principles, and techniques to fuel digital innovation. We want to help usher in a new approach to the way software is imagined, designed, and built. This episode is all about the importance of sleep for optimal performance. Our guest is Michelle Jonelis, a sleep medicine physician. Michelle specializes in behavior sleep therapy and has so many great things to say about sleep, why it's important for your health and reaching optimal performance, and how you can get better quality rest. We hope you enjoy this episode.
So, Michelle, it is so nice to have you on. I've been dying to talk about this topic for a very long time. Normally, we talk about software and kind of like technical topics, but I think when it comes to sleep and performance, it's very related. And so to have you on is wonderful. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll get started.
Hello, and thanks so much for inviting me on. I'm happy to talk about sleep with anyone who will ask, both personally and professionally. So, I'm a sleep medicine physician. I work in Redwood City, California, in a private practice, and I treat all types of sleep disorders. But my area of specialty within sleep medicine, believe it or not, you can specialize within sleep medicine, is behavioral therapy for sleep disorders. So, there's something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is a semi standardized treatment to help people with insomnia, and it's actually the recommended treatment for patients with insomnia. And I use similar techniques to help other people with other sleep disorders as well. So I do not use medications to help people sleep except in very limited circumstances. And yeah, and we can talk about that.
Oh, it's interesting. So we're speaking, it's March 23rd, Monday morning, and we're in the kind of the thick of this COVID pandemic that's happening across the world. And it'd be interesting to understand how sleep and getting good sleep kind of plays into how we transmit diseases or how we recover, and anything, maybe some tips or background information you have on that would be really helpful.
Sure. Okay. So sleep deprivation from external causes, and this is a distinction that we talk about in insomnia. So there's internally driven sleep deprivation, which is basically just a consequence of stress. You are stressed and you're not getting enough sleep because you can't sleep. You have the opportunity to get the sleep, but your mind is active and you just can't get to sleep. You're lying in bed, tossing and turning with an active mind. There's also externally driven sleep deprivation, like your child was sick and you were up with them all night, or you have to work very long hours at work. Your boss has making you finish a project, or maybe you're a healthcare worker on the front lines of the coronavirus. And we know that the externally driven sleep deprivation, so you don't have the opportunity for sleep, that does weaken our immune systems a little bit. One of the many things that happens during sleep is that our immune system recovers. It repairs. Our immune system is very active during the day, protecting us from viruses. And during the night, it, like all of our organ systems, does kind of maintenance work and tunes itself up, sort of processes everything that it was exposed to during the day. And if you shortchange sleep, you are going to be, the immune system will be slightly less well tuned, and you will be a little bit less prepared to face viruses. The internally driven sleep deprivation, so again, you're lying in bed tossing and turning, you have an active mind, you have a 10-hour sleep opportunity, but you just can't get to sleep. That is less clear. Being under chronic stress does suppress the immune system, and you want to address the stress, and we can talk about that. But I wouldn't worry so much if you're giving yourself an appropriate rest opportunity at night. Even if you're active, you're tossing and turning, it's not clear that you will have any immune system problems from that. So you should be fine as long as you are giving yourself adequate rest time at night. And for everybody else, do as much as you can to allow for sufficient time for sleep during this pandemic, I should say, global pandemic.
I hear you saying that our immune system slightly goes down. Is it a big effect, or I mean, what are people learning now about sleep that's making it critical today?
Well, so sleep for years relative to the rest of medicine was relatively inaccessible, because you would look at somebody while they're sleeping and they're just lying there. There wasn't a whole lot that you could see that they were doing per se. And so you couldn't access any particular research about sleep. We just sort of ignored it. It wasn't until the development of the polysomnogram, where somebody had the idea to put electrodes on somebody's head, superficial recording electrodes, and look at brain waves and then look at breathing. And they sort of developed this test which allowed you for the first time to see sleep. And that was when we became interested in sleep. And that was, I think, in about the 60s, the 70s. And from there, things started to build. But sleep is just relatively behind other fields of medicine because it was introduced later compared to other areas. So I think that's why there's just a delay between we kind of discover sleep, we start to have some idea about the different stages of sleep and what it does, and then the research just builds and builds and builds. So I don't know if I had to guess about why it is more of a hot topic. It's just because, there's been an expansion of knowledge about sleep in recent years.
Yeah, and you have also like higher profile like people. Arianna Huffington, right, has a big
Correct.
proponent of sleep and
Yes,
the
which is
book. What's
wonderful.
that one book we were talking about? Why We Sleep, man. If that
Why
doesn't
We
scare you
Sleep
to
is Matt Walker's book. We'll
sleep
talk
8 hours
about
a
that.
day.
Yeah, we'll talk about Matt Walker's book. It is a good book, but you have to kind of read it in a certain way. It can also be a scary book. Arianna Huffington's book I haven't read, but I suspect maybe is a little bit less scary.
Yeah, and I think it's all important. It's very related to, right, when it comes to work, because when we talk about um, companies building great software, because that's the basic premise of this podcast, building thoughtful software. There's a lot of ethical things in play. There's being at your best performance, and I think people are definitely realizing it, but still, I think they don't really quite understand. And that's how important sleep is to your creativity, to getting to that next level, or to helping your company make better decisions. Have you done any research on that and how those things are related?
Yes. So it is well known that if you shortchange, and there's research literature on this, if you shortchange sleep, if you do not allow your employees to get sufficient sleep, if they're sleep restricted, they will not perform optimally. That is very clear cut. It's sort of shocking because in medicine, throughout the training, systematic sleep deprivation is still a part of medical training. Forget about during the coronavirus outbreak, where it is essential to, potentially be under those conditions. But even when we're not under a global pandemic, people are still systematically sleep deprived during their medical training, and it's actually I mean, it's totally we can't understand it. Sleep medicine professionals cannot understand why that is still occurring, why it's allowed to occur, because the performance effects are so clear, the performance detriments from sleep deprivation. The other thing is, even beyond just the amount of time that you have available for sleep, you need some downtime. Performance gains level off. If you have people work too long of hours, especially if they're trying to do something creative, generate ideas, they're not just sort of rote machines, but even if they are acting like rote machines, performance tanks if you've been working too long. So there's a lot of literature on the optimum length of the workday, basically, and sort of how people function with different lengths of workdays. And I'm not as familiar with the workday literature, but it's something like an 8-hour workday. If you go beyond that, you are compromising your performance, and it's not clear how much extra you're actually going to get done. You also need downtime where you're not supposed to be doing anything, where you can just let your mind have those creative thoughts. And at night, your mind is also making connections, processing data that you learn, that you acquired that day, and coming up with creative ideas for the next day. So it's all very important to creativity and performing at your best. And a lot of tech companies do not value sleep, do not value downtime. They ask people to work unreasonable numbers of hours, and it really is not to the benefit of the tech company. I mean, I understand if you're launching a product on rare occasions and you really have to get the work done, there might be a short period of time where you have to have people work longer hours, but you should make a point that that is not the chronic state of the company. A quick thing about people who have work internationally. Okay. So a lot of companies nowadays, they have offices in India, right? All the way across the world. And it's very hard for an employee to function optimally when they have meetings scheduled at any time of the day or night. And working with an India office makes it very hard to have optimum performance, because India is like 12 hours different from us. And so this is a huge pitfall that I see in my patients that makes them very tired, is they've got got 7 a.m. meetings and now they have 11 p.m. meetings. And even if, say, they're taking some breaks during the day, just expecting, first of all, that clock variability, it might prevent them from having this regular bedtime and wake time. And they're just spread, they're sort of working continuously. There's no break period. And that's really unhealthy for them. And I think one of the best things you can do if you're running a company that has an office in India or again some other area with a very different time zone is you can ask employees what their preferred work schedule is. You can ask what's their preferred work schedule, what's their preferred sleep timing. And if you can find teams that have similar schedules, because there is this variability, right? Not everybody's a night owl, not everybody's a morning person. And if you can sort the groups by preferred sleep and meeting times, you're going to end up with everybody being a lot happier, healthier, and performing better.
What are some clear signs of sleep deprivation? So if you're a manager or an executive and you notice, things in your employees, what are some of the things that they could like look out for?
Yeah. So first of all, if an employee, you ever see an employee sleeping on the job or you see that they look sleepy, they're yawning, this has been historically viewed as a sign of laziness, right? The employee's lazy. What's wrong with them? Why are they falling asleep on the job? That's not a sign of laziness. That's a sign of a sleep problem. So what's going on? Are they, do they not have the right sleep opportunity at night? Do they have a sleep disorder such as obstructive sleep apnea, which we should definitely talk about at some point? It's not, you shouldn't view it as a sign of laziness, of failing on the part of the employee. It's a moment to step in, ask a question, say, hey, what's going on? Why are you so tired? Can I help you with that? And try to get them some more sleep. As a manager, it's very important to make sure that your employees have an adequate sleep opportunity each night. And it should be, you should give at least a 9-hour sleep opportunity per night on a regular basis. If you have to, on rare occasions, again, compress shorter than that, that's fine. Humans are resilient to relatively short bouts of sleep deprivation. We can kind of hold it together, partial sleep deprivation, but performance rapidly starts to decline the longer you go on.
Where did that come from? Like 8, 9 hours seems like a good number. Is there something
Right.
scientific
So
behind it?
I know. So the the exact amount of sleep that we need, despite what Matt Walker says in his book, which he's this big advocate that everybody needs 8.5 hours of sleep per night, the research literature is not as clear cut. In fact, I went to a talk a couple years ago. There's the annual sleep research conference, something called APSS, American Professional Sleep Societies meeting. All the sleep researchers and a lot of sleep clinicians get together and have this great meeting and talk about sleep. And there was a talk by one of the world's leading sleep deprivation researchers, this guy David Dinges, and he knows the sleep literature better than anybody else. He's advocated for more sleep for medical residents and for truck drivers, and he's just like, this is his area. And he gave a talk called How Much Sleep Do We Need? Interestingly, in the talk he didn't actually say how much sleep we need, to the point where I asked the question at the end of the talk, but how much sleep do we need? And he couldn't give an answer because it's not as clear cut as you would think. Just like all traits in the human population, right? People are different weights, people are different heights, people have different skin colors, people have different eye colors. People people have different immune systems. There's variability in the population in all human traits, which makes us resilient as a species overall. The same thing is true for sleep. So there are legitimately people out there who need less sleep, 6 hours or less. We have found some of them. They are not common. You can think of that as the tail of the bell-shaped curve. And then there's going to be people who need more sleep, who maybe need more like 9 hours or 10 hours. And that's the other tail of the bell-shaped curve. And then everybody else, sort of fits somewhere in between. But the 8 hours comes just from sleep research, from laboratory research on human subjects, where people basically don't perform optimally unless they are given at least an 8-hour sleep opportunity per night. That's what you see in research subjects. If you give in a research setting, you give the group of subjects less than 8 hours in bed, their performance will start to decline. So that's where that comes from. But the caveat, yeah, I mean, the caveat is that those are young. Those are often like 20 people in their 20s are a lot of sleep research subjects. So I think if you go older, people in their 40s, people in their 50s, it might not be quite as true with the 8 hours.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think people, like across like there's certain cultures that, you may get up in the middle of the night and, do something and then you may have to go back to sleep. Um,
Right. So
there's all kinds of different,
you're talking about biphasic sleep. So that's the other thing
right,
is that we in America there's this myth perpetuated by the media and some other people that there's only one way to sleep, right? The only way to sleep is to sleep through the night for 8 hours every single night. But that's actually not true. If you again, this comes down to this variability in the population, right? So some people do wake up during the night. That can actually be totally natural for them. Some people are lighter sleepers, some people are deeper sleepers. And the pop media often fails to acknowledge the variability in sleep traits that we see in the population that's well established. And yes, in different cultures around the world, if you look at how people slept historically, how people sleep now, there's a variety of patterns that you see. Like in a lot of equatorial regions, a lot of really hot areas in the world, people will stay up a lot later because that's the most pleasant time of day, right? That's when things cool off. Often the culture actually uses caffeine, evening caffeine, to kind of allow for that later bedtime. If you look at those cultures in a lot of Middle Eastern places, and then they will have a siesta in the afternoon, so they sort of still get up at not that late, and then they do a siesta in the afternoon to make sure that they're getting the full amount of sleep. And then this biphasic sleep that you were talking about, where you sleep in the two periods, that's well described in the Middle Ages in Europe, where nights, especially in winter, would have been very long. Nothing could happen when the sun went down. There was no artificial lighting. It was very unsafe outside. So people just kind of like went to bed when the sun went down. And it was well described that they would sleep often in two periods. There was first sleep and second sleep. And then there was this awakening between first and second sleep, where if you were a servant, you might do some chores. If you were lucky, you'd get to go back for the second sleep. There were things about
right.
the best babies, happening between, you should make a baby between first and second sleep. There were prayers that you would say there. So yeah, sleep, there are a variety of sleep patterns that can actually be compatible with good overall health. And it's not just 8 hours uninterrupted sleep.
Yeah, I think the important point there is to kind of remove this anxiety or stress about having a specific sleep pattern. Like you hear a lot of these, like a lot of celebrities or high profile Elon Musk, even the president famously says he sleeps 4 hours a day, and like Tim Cook from Apple, like wakes up at 4:30. You're like, oh shit, I better do that too, because he's CEO of Apple, and you need to kind of remove all that and figure out how you sleep and not stress so much that you're not sleeping like someone else.
Right, exactly. You can sleep like yourself. That there is the most important aspect of sleep, believe it or not, or one of the most important aspects actually has to do with schedule. So it is never, despite this variability that I've talked about in the trait, it is never healthy to have an irregular sleep schedule. That is not a pattern that we see, where one night you stay up till 11, the next night you go to bed at 8 p.m. Then one night you stay up till 2. Then the next night you go to bed at 10. Or even just during the work week, you're sleeping 10 to 6, and then on the weekends you're sleeping 2 a.m. until noon. That kind of shifting pattern is not healthy and is often neglected in discussions about sleep. Having a regular schedule where you have sort of an hour bedtime window, a half hour or hour wake time window, that is what is best for optimum sleep. But the exact timing of that schedule and the exact length of that can vary depending on the person. So for some people, a 6 hour window might actually be fine for them. On other people, they might need a longer window of time in bed. Some people are going to naturally be night owls, and they'll stay up until 2 or 3 every morning and sleep until 10 or 11. And that can be just fine. They shouldn't feel bad about that schedule. Maybe they stay up even later, as long as they have a consistent schedule. The consistency ends up being very important.
Yeah, and I think that's a myth, right? You can't really catch up on sleep. So, like, if you slept 4 hours one night and then the next hour you're gonna sleep 14, that's not, it doesn't equal out, right?
Right. So, I mean, on you can catch up on sleep deprivation experiments. After some sleep deprivation, subjects will sleep longer to catch up for the lost sleep. But on a regular basis, if you're not having regularity, if you're not in general getting sufficient sleep, your performance is not going to be optimal. So, yes, in general, you want to have that regular schedule. You want to allow for sufficient sleep. And then, if on rare occasions, again, there's a project you really need to do, and you give yourself 6 hours for say 3 nights in a row, as long as you kind of go back to that, then you can expand for a couple nights, you do a little bit deeper, longer sleep, and then you go back to your regular schedule. And that small amount of variability is fine. You just want to have it be as infrequent as possible.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so now I think we've been talking about, we know that now sleep is important, right? And
Yeah.
it affects our health and immunity. The other side of it is, there's so much information online about making ourselves, better people, extending our capabilities, being more creative, and this all these like task management techniques and God knows what to help improve your performance. But I think sleep might be the most important thing in how we are, more creative, how we can increase our, endurance, lower our stress, basically do better at work. Is if you sleep really well.
Yes,
Would you say
it's
that's
true.
correct?
Yes, absolutely. But I do want to also let you know that there's a lot of misconceptions about what leads to good sleep. So it turns out that the secret to good sleep is much the same as the secret to good overall health. So healthy lifestyle habits translate into healthy sleep. There are some things that we think about specifically for sleep, but they really just fall into the healthy lifestyle category, like the regular schedule, things like having a dark room at night, getting lots of sunlight during the day, having a cool room at night actually is very important for sleep, but all of those elements are also just important for good overall health.
Oh, so I had a question on that. So a cool room really does. I notice it helps me sleep better. What about like when like you're sick, or like we're talking about COVID, and I've heard studies that you should keep the temperature a little bit warmer because it does something. I think I'm not quite sure how it affects the viruses and things like that, but I don't know how that plays into a temperature. So
Yeah, well, so every virus out there has an optimum growing condition. They evolve under certain conditions. And then if they are trying to proliferate and spread, which is their goal as viruses, there's going to be, if you're not under those optimum conditions, you're going to be less successful. So for something like influenza, for instance, humidity does affect how well the virus grows on fomites, on surfaces other than the body. And so, like for influenza, if having increased humidity in a room does reduce the growth of viruses. Sorry, the virus can't proliferate on a surface; it needs a host to proliferate. But in terms of how well it survives outside of the host, it is more stable under the optimum conditions. And I think even the people in the room, if the humidity is higher in your nose, for instance, the virus can proliferate less well in your nose compared to if it's dry in your nose. So there are optimum conditions. We don't necessarily know those conditions for COVID yet. There is some speculation that warmer temperatures and more humid temperatures will reduce the success of proliferation in the human body of COVID and reduce its durability on surfaces. We have been using, personally, we use our humidity, we use a humidifier in the room. I was using that already to prevent more influenza and winter respiratory viruses, but it may be beneficial to use for coronavirus. That data is not out yet, the final word. But in terms of warming the room, humans evolved to sleep in a colder environment at night, and the minimum environmental temperature should actually be right before wake up time. One of the strongest wake up cues to our body ends up not being light, but the temperature flux point from minimum daily temperature to just starting to increase in the morning. And if you look at where cultures free of technology, what time they rise, that's what it is. It doesn't actually have to do with the time that first light happens. It's first warming of the environment. So if you can, and that is not that particular pattern of the temperature dropping over the night and then just fluxing right before wake up. That hasn't been studied yet in a systematic manner in terms of how it affects overall health, how it affects sleep quality. But we know that a cooler room in general does improve sleep quality. And so I wouldn't, too cold of a room is going to also compromise your quality and compromise your immune system. But somewhere in the order of setting your thermostat anywhere between kind of 58 to 62 degrees as the minimum at night is probably actually going to be helpful for your overall health and immune system function and all of that, rather than hurtful. I would not purposely raise the temperature.
oh wow, I've been setting it to like 66, 60. I'm
Yeah,
like,
so
oh
you
shoot.
kind of have to build up to it. The thing is, you don't have to set it to that temperature. It falls to that temperature over the course of the night. So, like for us, everybody in this area, lots of people have Nest thermostats. So you can actually have, you look at my thermostat settings, for instance, I have it drop at multiple points throughout the night, right? So I don't, right when I go to sleep, I don't turn it to 58 degrees because it would fall too quickly. And then also it would start warming in the morning. The thermostat, the heat would start turning on to warm it up. And that would wake me up, even though it's just maintaining the 58 degrees. Every time the heater comes on, it reduces the sleep quality. So I sort of have it drop, 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 drop. And then I think at 4 a.m. or something like that, it drops to 58 degrees so that the heater doesn't go on and wake me up in the morning.
Oh my, that is so fascinating.
Yeah. So this is sort of an area I kind of geek out over temperature and sleep, if you will. There's other people who do too, right? There's whole personal cooling products nowadays. There's these cooling pads that you can get for the bed. A lot of newer mattresses are having cooling features. So this is definitely an area, but the research lags behind what people are actually doing. Like that specific recommendation that I do, there is no research study right now that supports that exact pattern. It's more philosophical based on what we've seen about sleep in hunter-gatherers and people who live free of technology.
Since sleep is very personalized, how would you what tips do you have, that for me or for someone else, that how they can find their like optimal settings of, how many hours they should be sleeping, or, kind of what works for them, temperature
Right.
settings and things. How do you go about that process?
Yeah, I mean, so temperature, those things are not going to be as variable because it's things like environmental things like temperature and sunlight are humans evolved within that forever. So those are just sort of external factors. And you do want to lower the temperature at night. But the exact point at which you get uncomfortable, you just try it. What I recommend is typically you go about 2 degrees cooler. You start by going 2 degrees cooler than what you're doing now, and you see how that works. And then, once you're comfortable with that, you can go a little bit cooler and you can just sort of push it to that point where you finally start waking up cold, or when you get to 62 degrees, you don't have to, there's no real reason I can give you for going cooler than 62 degrees. We don't know that that's necessarily better. So you can just sort of slowly lower it and get to that goal. But in terms of general, how can you tell if your sleep is sufficient or not? I do have to talk, I want to make everybody aware of something called obstructive sleep apnea, because this is a huge problem nationally. Obstructive sleep apnea is a problem where your airway, your throat collapses during sleep, blocking the airflow, and then your brain will pull your airway open. But each time the throat closes off, you're stopping breathing and you are actually disrupting your sleep quality. And it is very, very common, and it causes a reduction in sleep quality. So if you have sleep apnea, even if you're dropping your temperature, you're spending enough time in bed, you're doing everything else right, you're never going to have optimum sleep quality because you have this breathing problem that you don't know about during the night. And you're going to still wake up feeling poorly. You're still going to be tired during the day. You can't fix that without treating the sleep apnea. The sleep apnea is one of many consequences of the obesity epidemic that we're seeing. So certainly if anyone is overweight or obese, and you have to actually judge that, ethnic background plays a role, like body mass index greater than 25 is considered overweight for Caucasians, greater than 23 is considered overweight for people of East Asian backgrounds. So you have to take that into account. And if you're at all overweight, you're at higher risk for sleep apnea, even though some people who are thinner than that, you can still have sleep apnea. It's just not as common. And then if you snore, somebody tells you that you stop breathing during the night, if you are really and you're spending enough time in bed, but you're waking up with a headache, you're waking up feeling non-refreshed, you'd say you feel worse on waking than you did when you went to sleep, those would all be signs that you have sleep apnea. Another sign would be if you start urinating more during the night, you get up a couple times to pee during the night, especially if you also snore, maybe you're overweight, that also can be very suggestive of sleep apnea. It's one of the causes of urinating at night. So that you want to check for those signs. And if you don't know what you do during the night, you can ask a bed partner. If you have no bed partner, there's snore detection apps that you can just download on your phone nowadays. You put it next to the bed. It'll tell you if you snore. Some of them even track breathing and can give you an estimation about whether it thinks you have sleep apnea or not. Obviously, that's not going to be as good as seeing somebody, but if that's what you want to do to start, you can use one of those apps, and then you can go see a physician who can order a sleep study and check you for that. So sleep apnea, make sure you don't have that. So if you don't have sleep apnea, then you have to sort of see how you feel during the day. If you feel like you're functioning pretty well, you may be getting enough sleep. But when people are chronically sleep deprived, it actually, they are very poor judges of how they're performing, and they're very poor judges of if they're sleepy or not. So you can't always rely on how you feel. You can, if you are somebody who's, say, getting 6 hours of sleep a night, I typically recommend that you push it. You go to 7, you go to 8, and you see how you feel. And you can't just do it on one night. You really have to do sort of a 2 to 4 week trial of sleep extension, if you will, to see how you feel. So you want to give yourself more of a sleep opportunity for an extended period of time, and then you judge how you feel. You can go back to your old schedule, say, oh my God, I feel terrible. I had no idea that I was functioning so poorly. And we see that all the time.
Yeah, and I think it seems like there's a lot of things to consider here, and people need to actually take an active role in helping them sleep better. Because
Yes.
one of the things you mentioned of poor decision making, I'm curious on what's the research of lack of sleep and making better like ethical decisions. Because I've noticed I've heard things around, you can see an executive, or even like, I've read some things about Elon Musk when he says certain things, you're like, well, that's probably sleep related. And I'm
Yes.
curious, like, what the research behind that is. Even the president who has these tweet firestorms.
Yeah. So the president, I do not know the president. I've never met the president. I've never examined the president. So it's very hard to say for sure what is going on with the president. But my personal suspicion is, first of all, that he has sleep apnea. And so his sleep quality is not good. And if you have very severe sleep apnea, it's actually hard to get enough sleep because you have very disrupted sleep, kind of in something called REM sleep, which happens more in the second half of the night. And so he probably sort of can't get that sleep. But he, in my opinion, shows signs of frontal lobe dysfunction, which your frontal lobes are responsible for clear headed, well considered decisions, right? He does sort of what he wants at the moment that he's impulsive, if you will. He's impulsive, which is a sign of frontal lobe dysfunction, which can be well correlated with sleep deprivation. So I think he does show signs of chronic sleep deprivation. It's well known in sleep deprivation research studies that being sleep deprived results in us making riskier decisions. And you can think of it as a stress response, right? So if we're not getting sleep in our ancestral days, why are we not getting sleep? Things are not going well. It's sort of a stressful state. And so it's basically, you either try something dramatic or you die, right? Like things are not going well. You're getting less and less sleep and you don't have many options. And so it makes sense that you would kind of take a riskier decision under those circumstances, because it could go really poorly and then you die, but it also could go really well. And now you're all of a sudden going to get yourself out of that sleep deprivation situation. So that's what happens. There's this video, this nature video I always think about, where it's like a polar bear who's, looking for something to eat, and polar bears normally eat seals, but this polar bear, he's hungry, he hasn't had anything to eat, he's sleep deprived, he's been going, he's very stressed, and so he sees a walrus and he decides, I'm going to go for the walrus. Like, it seems like a great idea, and it's a terrible idea because polar bears can't really eat walruses, and indeed he doesn't fare so well, but maybe he would have. But had that polar bear not been sleep deprived, he wouldn't have gone for the walrus, he would have gone for the seal, like a regular polar bear.
Yeah, that is really interesting, and I'm also very interested in how sleep affects our creativity, and especially here in Silicon Valley, technical capabilities. I think designing software and coding, you think you just kind of sit down and start writing a bunch of lines of code, but it's actually a very creative activity, and there's a lot of art to it, and I'm interested in how sleep affects those capabilities.
Yeah, so sleep, definitely, we need, again, optimum sleep in order to function our best. On the other hand, creativity, sometimes if we're a little bit disinhibited, our frontal lobes are not working as well, we can have some creative thoughts. And during the night itself, our frontal lobes are not quite working properly, and we are just during any given night, we are going to be a little bit more creative than during the day. And this results in, during the night, even when we're asleep, our brain is processing things and we can wake up with a great idea. Or if you're one of those people who, when you're under stress, your mind is kind of active at night, it's spinning through things, you can come up with some good ideas during that night thinking state as well, and you can have some creative ideas from that. But sleep is important to, in general, to creativity. And yes, if you want to perform maximally, you want to allow for optimum sleep.
Well, I think, to kind of wrap things up, because I can talk to you probably for hours about this, and find it really interesting. Uh, what are your, just maybe some general tips, or your kind of outlook? And we've talked about there's so many resources now available to us that we can kind of figure out what's the best way to sleep, and we understand there's health risks and benefits to taking a look at sleep. Are there any other general tips, or maybe some advice as we kind of go through this COVID pandemic on how we can reduce our anxiety and sleep better?
Yeah, I mean, so the COVID pandemic, lots of people are stressed. They're worried. They're worried not only about getting ill and their loved ones and the economy, and all of that, but even things with their kids. What are they going to do with their kids during the day? You're trying to plan a curriculum for them. How are you going to keep the kids busy while you have to do some work? Or how are you going to get groceries when groceries are increasingly hard to get? So there's lots of little specific things that we are worried about. And if you don't give yourself adequate time to address those worries during the day, be it about COVID or about other life stressors, they will bleed out into the night. Your brain wants to think about them. It's on your mind. Even if you're suppressing it during the day, you're keeping yourself so busy that you're not thinking about it. It's going to come out at night. So if at night your mind is active, you're worried about things, that's when your worries are coming out. First of all, that's normal. Our brains work through things at night. And if we didn't attend to them during the day, that's the only time that it's going to happen. But we're often less rational at night. We're less able to think about it in a logical manner. And so you can prevent some of that nighttime rumination just by dedicating some time to problem solving during the day. So you don't want to do it right in the evening before bed, because that will just lead to you taking those thoughts as you go to sleep. But earlier in the evening, try to find some quiet alone time and do a little bit of problem solving. You can even write out your worries. Say you're worried about coronavirus. You don't know what you're worried about exactly. Your mind has just been spinning. If you just go through and write it out, you get it on paper or you type it out, it often helps because you flesh that out and now you have a better handle on the thoughts in your mind. You also really want to avoid, this is in general, we want to avoid watching news, looking at news, browsing social media for an hour before bed. That is especially true now. If you're reading the latest news about the coronavirus right before you go to bed, that's going to really amp you up. It's going to bleed over into the night. So you want to leave kind of an hour of screen free and social media free wind down time before bed. And you could watch some TV during that time if you like doing that, just something lightweight. You can watch TV within the hour before bed, but you want to, in general, keep actually the lights kind of dim, keep it very calm, and definitely do not check the news before bed in the hour before bed unless it's somehow going to change something that you do in that hour during the night, which it's not going to. Uh, so just don't do it. That's going to make a huge difference. For sleep, for most people, you should try to figure out an 8-hour sleep window, like say something like 10 to 6 that feels natural for your body, or 10:30 to 6:30. And then you want to try to stick to that within kind of plus or minus 30 minutes. So for 10:30 to 6:30, you could go to bed as early as 10. You could stay up as late as 11. And then you could wake up as early as 6. You could sleep until 7 and stick to that really as much as you can. Stick to that schedule. You want to try to keep the lights dimmer in the evening for an hour or two before bed. Get rid of blue light. We didn't have a chance to talk about that, but there's lots of stuff written about that online. And then during the day, we actually want to get a lot of bright light. As soon as you wake up in the morning, once it's your desired wake time, if you wake up before your desired wake time, still go ahead and keep those lights dim. Avoid waking your body up too much. But if you wake up at your desired wake time, then you want to turn the lights on. You want to get things really bright starting about half an hour after you wake up in the morning, and you want to get outside. And getting outside is especially important during this pandemic. The stay home recommendation, we want to stay away from each other. It's really isolate yourself recommendation, but you should still be going outside. In fact, with my family, we've been doing a walk twice a day, every single day. And I recommend that for everybody. You just go outside. You want to try to get an hour or two of sunlight every single day. And that will keep you a lot healthier and get you some exercise as well, movement.
Yeah, I totally forgot about the blue light, but yeah, maybe at some point. Now I'm just thinking about it. It'd be great to just have, here are Michelle's recommendations for products you should put
Right.
on.
Well, yes. No, yeah, and you don't need a lot of sleep tech. You really don't. I mean, sunlight is the best thing, and then just using not using a lot of light in the evening is typically fine. But I have noticed, like with families of kids where the kids stay up late, because kids are very sensitive to light. And so it's usually when I go over to that person's house, they have these kind of cooler LED lights that they have on till very late at night, or they're giving the kids screens. And that's why the kids are staying up late at night. If you actually have dim light in the evening, the kids are not going to stay up that late.
Oh, that's a good point. Before I
Yeah.
let you go, I'm just curious because I'm in the market for a new mattress. What is it like?
Mm.
Is there any thoughts around that? Like firm mat?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, so there are these classic studies that were mostly again done like in people in their 20s or even late teens. They were done kind of in colleges in the early days of sleep, but they basically showed that there was no difference between, again, these are like 20-year-olds, right? Sleeping on a concrete floor versus a mattress, that like didn't make a difference in
Mm.
terms of how they slept. But so the mattress field, even though they say we're promoting healthy sleep, right? It's not, it's basically very separate from sleep medicine and sleep research. The general recommendation is you want a mattress that feels comfortable to you. The newer recommendation also has to do with temperature. So I am a big fan of these temperature modulating products. I think now Sleep Number beds modulate temperature, or you can get one of these cooling pads to put on the mattress. There's even things called a high heat capacity
Oh,
mattress,
interesting.
low heat capacity mattress. So it basically, the idea, I can't even remember on the fly which one you want to get, but it's basically, the idea is if the mattress has a lot of air in it, when your body is going to heat it up, right? So it's going to get pretty warm. But if you have like metal, like say something like these weighted blankets that people are getting, they're filled with metal, which stays cooler longer. And so you're actually sort of cooling the body. And maybe if somebody experiences a benefit in their sleep from a weighted blanket, it doesn't so much have to do with the weight of the blanket. It just has to do with the fact that it's a little bit of a cooling blanket. It's not being heated up by your body for longer than a typical blanket. So the cooling products I think are cool. If I need a new mattress, I'll probably get one that has this personal cooling feature. Then I don't have to use my thermostat. I can just use the mattress, which is probably more energy efficient. But then again, if you have kids, if you have multiple people in the house, not everybody has the cooling mattress, you're still going to have to use the thermostat. So it might not be
Yeah,
worth it.
it can
But
get
yeah,
expensive.
it can get expensive. Yeah. But so, get whatever's comfortable. If you can get one that doesn't warm up as easily, that stays a little bit cooler, that's going to be potentially helpful. And yeah.
It's great to speak to you about it because, just coming from a, experienced source, I know there's just a lot of misinformation out there. So this was really good conversation. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did. And I'm happy to talk to you more about sleep anytime.
Thanks for listening. You can always connect with us at skiplist.com.